The world was silent when he opened his eyes. Not the silence of peace, nor the silence of morning dew and drifting birdsong. This silence was heavy, pressing, almost suffocating. It was the silence of a world emptied of life. Ethan Reeves blinked against the dim fluorescent light above him. His throat burned like sandpaper, and when he tried to speak, only a rasping groan slipped past his lips. Tubes dangled from his arms. A heart monitor lay dead beside his bed, its glass screen fractured, wires trailing like veins ripped from a corpse. He sat up slowly, the sheet stiff with dried sweat. The smell hit him next, stale, metallic, with an undertone of something rancid. Something that had been here far too long. He tore out the four, wincing, and forced his feet to the ground. His muscles screamed. His body felt hollow, starved, abandoned. He staggered toward the doorway, dragging his weight like a man still tethered to the grave. The hospital corridor stretched out before him, long and pale, a skeletal ribcage of cracked plaster and dangling wires. A wheelchair rested on its side, one wheel still spinning faintly as if touched by unseen hands. Dried streaks of blood marred the walls in long clawing smears. Ethan didn't remember how he'd gotten here. The last thing he recalled was the road, his bicycle skimming along a cracked highway, a desperate messenger delivering what few supplies and letters still mattered to the scattered enclaves of survivors. Then, nothing. Blackness. And now, this. Something scuttled ahead of him, low to the ground. His chest tightened. But when he reached the movement, he found only a rat gnawing at a shriveled hand that jutted from beneath a curtain. The hand was stiff, skin gray and paper-thin. The rat hissed and darted away. He pressed on. The main doors of the hospital had been barricaded once, but someone, or something, had smashed through. Shattered glass crunched beneath his bare feet as he stepped outside. London lay before him, or what was left of it. The city had always been grim, even before the rage virus reduced it to ash and ruin, but now it was skeletal, a husk of its former self. Blackened cars rusted in heaps along the street. Streetlights leaned at broken angles, their bulbs shattered. Posters flapped faintly in the wind, their faded lettering screaming "Stay indoors and quarantine zone." And then, the bones. They were everywhere. Skulls stacked along walls. Spines tied together like wind chimes. Entire ribs nailed into doorframes. Ethan's stomach churned as he realized someone had arranged them deliberately. Not the infected, they had no patience for such ritual. This was human work. His knees nearly buckled as memory pierced the fog of his coma. The Bone Temple. Rumors had spread, whispered between survivors like campfire stories. A monument made of human remains, built by a doctor gone mad. A place where the dead were worshipped and the living, repurposed. Ethan had dismissed it as another tale to keep children quiet at night. But now, as he staggered through the ruined street, he knew it wasn't myth. The air carried the faint thrum of chanting. Far away, but growing. He pressed himself against a wall, trembling, and peered around the corner. That was when he saw them. They moved in unison, a parade of grotesque devotion. Dozens of men and women, all wearing the same garish uniform, brightly colored tracksuits, cheap blonde wigs, faces powdered white. Their eyes glittered with manic devotion as they dragged prisoners through the street. Survivors, bound and gagged, their eyes wide with pleading terror. At the center of the procession strode a tall figure, his presence magnetic, his grin wide enough to split his face. Sir Jimmy Crystal. Ethan had heard the name before, whispered with dread. A cult leader. A sadist. The one they called the Shepherd of Bones. Crystal carried a scepter made from a femur capped with a skull. He raised it high as the cult chanted. The Bone Temple rises. The Jimmies will reign. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. One of the prisoners, a woman no older than 20, tried to resist. She kicked, screamed into her gag, tears streaking her dirty cheeks. Sir Jimmy stopped, cocked his head, and laughed. The sound was hollow, like a hyena echoing down a tomb. He gestured, and 2 cultists pinned her to the ground. Another approached with a hacksaw. Ethan turned away, bile rising in his throat, but he couldn't block out the sounds, the muffled scream, the whirring saw, the wet snap of bone. The crowd cheered as if it were theater. Ethan pressed his hand to his mouth. The rage-infected had once been humanity's worst nightmare. But this was worse. These were not beasts, but people. People who had chosen to become monsters. He stumbled backward, his heel crunching on glass. The sound cracked through the chanting. Heads turned. Dozens of painted faces, all with those horrible wigs, swung toward him at once. Ethan froze, heart hammering in his chest. Then Sir Jimmy Crystal raised his skull-tipped scepter and pointed it directly at him. "Another lamb for the temple," he said, his voice oily with delight. The crowd roared. And Ethan ran. Ethan's lungs burned as he sprinted down the alley, bare feet slapping against broken stone, the roar of the cult echoing behind him. His body was weak, still half dead from coma, but terror pushed him forward. "Catch him," a voice shrieked, distorted with madness. He turned a corner, only to find more bones. Entire archways built of femurs loomed over the street, skulls grinning down in endless rows. Whoever had done this hadn't simply killed, they had arranged, built, constructed. An artist of death. He scrambled through the ruins, ducking into doorways, weaving between toppled cars, but the chanting didn't fade. The jimmies moved like a hive, voices merging into a grotesque chorus. "One of us. One of us. One of us." His chest convulsed as he staggered into a courtyard. At the center stood a sculpture so horrifying that his mind nearly shut down at the sight of it, a towering cross made of stitched-together ribcages, bound with sinew, crowned with a skull bigger than any human head. Its empty sockets seemed to watch him. And then he saw the fires. Torches burned at the edges of the courtyard, their flames blackened by fat-soaked cloth. Around them stood more cultists, watching silently, as if waiting for him to fall into their arms. Ethan bolted left, smashing through a rotting door into what had once been a church. Dust fell from the ceiling. The pews were gone, replaced by piles of bones and scraps of bright, filthy fabric. At the altar, nailed into the wall, was a single word carved in jagged letters. "Rise." The jimmy's footsteps pounded closer. He ran to the back of the church, found a cracked stairwell, and climbed, his body screaming with exhaustion. He burst onto the roof, the wind slashing at him, and for the first time he saw it. The Bone Temple. It rose on the horizon like a mountain of corpses, vast and terrible, a pyramid of bleached skeletons and twisted iron, spires made from ribcages and vertebrae. It glowed faintly under the blood-colored sunset, an obscene monument clawing at the heavens. Ethan felt his knees weaken. This wasn't myth. It was real. And it was alive with movement. Figures, dozens, maybe hundreds, climbed its sides like ants, hauling bones, chanting praises, adding to the structure. He backed away from the edge, trembling. Behind him, the door to the roof burst open. "Got him." Hands clawed at him, pulling, dragging him down. He kicked, bit, thrashed, but he was too weak. They pinned him against the cracked tiles, laughter echoing in his ears. Then a shadow fell across them. The cultists froze. Ethan turned his head and saw a man approaching through the doorway. He wore no wig, no tracksuit, but something about him was worse. He was tall, gaunt, wrapped in a blood-stained doctor's coat. His face was thin, hawkish, eyes sunken but burning with feverish brilliance. In his hands, he carried a satchel that rattled with bone. "Dar." "Kelson," whispered one of the cultists reverently. Ethan's stomach dropped. The architect of the Bone Temple. Kelson ignored the cultists and crouched before Ethan. His breath smelled of formaldehyde and rot. He studied Ethan with a mixture of fascination and hunger, like a child finding a new insect to pin in his collection. "You've been asleep," Kelson said softly. His voice was calm, almost kind, but it carried a weight that froze Ethan's blood. "A long slumber. And yet you awaken, now. Curious." Ethan tried to speak, but his throat only croaked. Kelson reached out, brushing the side of Ethan's face with skeletal fingers. "So fragile, these messengers. But you are not ordinary, are you?" His lips twisted into a smile. "I've been waiting for one like you." The cultists tightened their grip on Ethan's arms. He fought, shaking his head, but Kelson raised a hand. "Release him." They obeyed instantly. Ethan collapsed, gasping. Kelson stood, his shadow long and skeletal against the setting sun. "He will come with me. Sir Jimmy may play with his dolls, but I am building eternity. The temple must feed, and the temple must think. This one will help." The cultists bowed. Ethan stared at Kelson in horror. "Help," he croaked. Kelson leaned close again, and for a moment Ethan saw the madness behind his eyes. "Do you not hear them?" he whispered. "The infected? They speak now. Their rage has become language. They are evolving. And I am the one they confide in." Ethan felt ice crawl down his spine. Communicate with them? It was impossible. Unthinkable. Kelson's grin widened, almost splitting his gaunt face. "Come, messenger. The temple awaits. And you will see what becomes of men when gods of bone rise among them." The cultists seized Ethan again, dragging him toward the horizon where the bone temple glowed like a beacon of death. And in the distance, beyond the chants of the jimmies, Ethan thought he heard something else, low, guttural, inhuman. A chorus of infected, howling in unison. Almost like they were laughing. They dragged Ethan across the cracked streets like a lamb being hauled to slaughter. His bare feet tore open on the jagged stones, leaving streaks of blood in his wake. The chants of the jimmies followed, echoing, hypnotic, pulling him toward the monstrous silhouette rising against the crimson sky. The bone temple loomed higher with every step. Its spires stabbed the clouds, ribcage arches twisting into impossible angles. Torches flickered along its surface, lighting pale skulls that stared outward like saints in a cathedral of death. The structure creaked in the wind, not wood, not stone, but bone grinding against bone. It was alive in its way, a body made of corpses. When they reached the gates, massive doors made of welded spines, two cultists pushed them open with reverence. A stench rolled out, thick and suffocating, the reek of rot, of marrow cooking in fire, of blood dried and flaked to dust. Ethan gagged, but the jimmies only smiled, as though the air was perfume. Inside, the temple pulsed with noise. Drums pounded from somewhere deep within. Voices wailed, a hymn of madness. The walls were lined with bones, stacked meticulously like bricks, held together with cords of sinew. In niches where saints might have stood, there were preserved torsos, skin stretched tight, mouths sewn into grins. Candles burned in their hollowed eye sockets. Ethan's stomach lurched. His legs weakened. He wanted to collapse, to surrender, but the cultists pulled him forward. They entered the nave, a vast chamber where hundreds of jimmies swayed in unison, tracksuits gleaming under torchlight, blonde wigs bobbing like fields of rotten wheat. At the far end stood a throne made entirely of skulls, fused together with iron rods. And upon that throne sat Sir Jimmy Crystal. His grin widened when he saw Ethan. "Our little messenger," he crooned. "Delivered to us by fate itself." The crowd cheered, a wall of sound that rattled the skulls around them. Ethan flinched as Sir Jimmy rose. He strutted forward, scepter tapping against the bones beneath his feet. But before he could reach Ethan, Dr. Kelson appeared. His presence silenced the room. Even Sir Jimmy's smirk faltered. "The messenger is mine," Kelson said. His voice was calm, measured, but the weight behind it was undeniable. Sir Jimmy chuckled, though his eyes gleamed with irritation. All things belong to the temple, Doctor. Even this one. Kelson's jaw tightened. For a moment Ethan thought they might turn on each other. But then Kelson bent his head slightly. Yes. To the temple. Which I serve better than your games. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sir Jimmy sneered, but he let it go. He waved his scepter lazily. Take him then. But remember, Doctor, without my flock, your temple would be dust. Kelson ignored him and seized Ethan by the arm, dragging him down a side passage. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The torches thinned until only faint blue lanterns flickered, casting shadows that seemed to crawl. The walls here weren't just bones, they were fused with flesh. Limbs jutted from the mortar, fingers twitching faintly as if still alive. Ethan whimpered. What do you want from me? Kelson didn't answer. He pulled Ethan through an archway into a chamber that made Ethan's blood turn to ice. At its center sat a massive figure, shackled in chains thick as tree trunks. An infected. But not like the ones Ethan remembered. This one was larger, its muscles swollen grotesquely, skin torn and blistered. Its eyes glowed faintly in the gloom, not mindless rage but something worse, awareness. It didn't thrash like the others. It sat still, breathing heavily, its chest rising and falling like a bellows. And when it turned its head, its gaze locked directly on Ethan. Ethan stumbled backward, but Kelson caught him. Do not fear, Kelson whispered. His tone was almost tender, like a priest soothing a child. This one is special. I call him the listener. The infected bared its teeth, a low rumble escaping its throat. But its eyes never left Ethan's. Kelson knelt beside it, placing a hand on its chest. They are changing, he said, his voice trembling with fevered delight. No longer mindless. Their rage is evolving. And the listener speaks to me. Ethan shook his head violently. That's impossible. Kelson laughed, high and thin. Is it? He told me you would come. He told me you would help us build the temple into something more. Something eternal. The listener growled again, deeper this time, and Ethan swore he heard words hidden inside the sound, whispers crawling through the marrow of his bones. Join us. His knees buckled. His vision blurred. Kelson caught him, whispering into his ear. You see. The temple doesn't just feed on flesh. It feeds on souls. And soon, even death will bow. Ethan tried to scream, but the sound caught in his throat. Because as he looked again at the listener, he realized its jaw was moving. Slowly, deliberately, as though it were smiling. The listener's smile haunted Ethan even after Kelson dragged him from the chamber. It was impossible. The infected didn't smile. They didn't speak. They were supposed to be blind rage, nothing more. But this one, it watched him. It knew him. Kelson's grip was iron as he pulled Ethan deeper into the labyrinth of the temple. They passed corridors lined with cages. Inside, survivors huddled in filth, their eyes hollow, their arms covered in bite scars. Some whispered to themselves. Others simply stared at the walls. A few reached out through the bars, begging Ethan with their eyes, but Kelson yanked him forward. You see their decay. Kelson said, voice sharp. That is what Sir Jimmy would have them be, meat for his games, bone for his throne. Wasteful. Blind. He looked back at Ethan, eyes glittering. But I am different. I see potential. I see evolution. They entered a wide chamber where torches flickered against a monstrous sculpture. It was a woman. Or rather, the twisted semblance of one, built entirely from skulls and femurs. Ribs curled like hair around her face. Her hands were claws of finger bones. Candles flickered in her chest cavity, where a heart should have been. At the base of the sculpture, something moved. Ethan's breath caught when he realized it wasn't stone. A woman knelt there, draped in tattered cloth, her face hidden by a veil made from stitched human skin. Her body twitched as if in prayer. Kelson's voice softened. "My bride." Ethan recoiled. What the hell do you mean?" The veiled woman turned her head slightly, and through the gaps in the skin, Ethan saw her eyes. They glowed faintly, infected eyes. "She was once like the others," Kelson whispered reverently. "Mindless. Rage embodied. But I touched her. I spoke to her. And she listened." Ethan shook his head violently. "That's not possible. They don't yet," Kelson interrupted, his voice rising with manic fervor. "But they are learning. They crave not just blood, but connection. She understands me. She loves me." As if on cue, the woman's head tilted back, and a low guttural sound rumbled from her throat. But beneath the growl was something Ethan couldn't deny, a word. "Kel, son." Ethan stumbled back, bile flooding his throat. The infected was speaking. Kelson's eyes filled with tears. He dropped to his knees beside her, stroking her veiled head tenderly. "Do you hear it, messenger? She is not beast. She is becoming. The temple is not just for bones, it is for rebirth." The bride of bones reached out a trembling hand. Her fingers were stiff, claws cracked, but she grasped Kelson's wrist with a grip that made him shudder in ecstasy. Ethan couldn't move. He couldn't even breathe. This was beyond infection, beyond science. This was blasphemy. Kelson rose, his face alight with holy madness. "The listener told me she would be my partner. Together, they guide me. The temple is not mine, it is ours." From the darkness above, chains rattled. Ethan looked up and saw cages hanging from the rafters, filled with half-dead survivors. Their mouths were sewn shut, their bodies riddled with crude carvings. The symbols carved into their skin matched those etched into the bones around the chamber, spirals, jagged lines, words that seemed to crawl if you stared too long. "They feed her," Kelson explained casually, gesturing to the cages. "Their marrow, their whispers, their suffering, it binds her to me. The temple grows from them. And soon," he spread his arms wide. "All humanity will kneel here, whether they are flesh or rage." One of the caged survivors began thrashing violently, eyes wide, muffled screams ripping through the stitches in their lips. Blood ran down their chin. The bride of bones tilted her head, then let out a guttural shriek. The cage dropped. It hit the floor with a sickening crunch, the survivor's body folding in on itself. The bride crawled forward on all fours, moving like a spider. Ethan gagged as she tore the body open with her claws, devouring organs with terrifying precision, all while Kelson looked on with rapture. "She must eat to grow," Kelson whispered, almost weeping with joy. "But it is not hunger, it is communion." Ethan backed against the wall, shaking violently. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body was locked in terror. The bride's head snapped toward him, blood dripping from her veiled mouth. For a moment, Ethan swore he heard her voice again, whispering not Kelson's name but his. Dan." Kelson's eyes widened, and a mad smile spread across his face. "She has chosen you." Ethan's stomach turned to stone. The walls of the temple seemed to pulse, the bones vibrating with whispers he couldn't understand. And he realized then that Kelson wasn't just building a monument of death, he was building a new species. Ethan was dragged from the chamber of the bride, his mind spinning. Her voice, his name, echoed like rot in his skull. He wanted to believe it was delirium, his starved brain inventing horrors, but the look in Kelson's eyes told him it was no dream. The cultists hauled him into the temple's heart. The central chamber was vast, a cavern of bone and fire. Spires of vertebrae reached upward like petrified trees. Skulls lined the walls in perfect grids, each one filled with burning candles that dripped wax like tears. The ceiling was a writhing lattice of chains, and from each chain dangled a human body, some alive, some skeletal, all swaying gently as if breathing together. In the middle of the chamber stood a pit, its edges carved with spirals and symbols that glowed faintly. From within, a hot wind breathed, carrying the stink of blood and something older, something that felt wrong in Ethan's marrow. Hundreds of Jimmies filled the room, swaying in their gaudy tracksuits and blonde wigs, their faces painted with grotesque smiles. Their chanting shook the bones around them. Morrow! 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 Sir Jimmy Crystal stood at the pit's edge, his skull-tipped scepter raised high. His grin was wide, teeth yellow, eyes gleaming with unholy pride. Tonight, the temple drinks, he cried, and the crowd howled. Ethan was shoved to his knees beside the pit. He looked down, and his heart stuttered. Inside, writhing in a soup of blood and broken bones, were infected. Dozens of them, stripped of their limbs, their jaws clamped in iron, their torsos still thrashing. Their eyes burned with rage, but their mouths could not scream. The pit was their prison, their altar. Kelson stepped forward, hands trembling with ecstasy. The rite of marrow, he said, as if whispering scripture. The infected and the living, joined by bone, bound by blood. The temple feeds on both. And through this, my bride grows stronger. A prisoner was dragged forward. A man, gagged, his face beaten, eyes wide with terror. The cultists forced him onto a platform above the pit. Sir Jimmy raised his scepter. With marrow we rise, he shouted. The crowd roared, and the platform tipped. The man tumbled into the pit. Ethan's stomach clenched as the limbless infected surged toward him, jaws snapping, heads butting like animals. They swarmed him, tearing into his flesh, cracking bones with their teeth. The man's muffled screams cut through the chamber, then choked, then silenced. Blood geysered upward, spattering the cultists. They cheered as if baptized. Another prisoner was dragged forward. A woman this time. The process repeated. Her body disappeared beneath the writhing mass, her marrow devoured. The pit boiled with blood. Ethan trembled, bile rising in his throat. He wanted to scream, to run, but the cultists held him fast. Kelson turned to him, eyes alight. Do you see? The rage no longer destroys, it sustains. They are becoming symbiotic. They drink not just blood, but marrow. The seed of life, of soul. And soon, Ethan, you too will feed the temple. Sir Jimmy strutted past, his grin mocking. But first, the guest must witness the union. He gestured, and two cultists wheeled in a cage. Inside, half-conscious and shivering, was a child. No older than 10. Ethan's heart stopped. No, he whispered. The child whimpered as the cage was dragged to the pit. Sir Jimmy raised his scepter, the crowd shrieking with anticipation. Kelson stepped forward sharply. No. Not that one. Sir Jimmy cocked his head, grin stretching. And why not, Doctor? Kelson's face twitched. His voice lowered. The listener has forbidden it. The child is not to be touched. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Jimmies exchanged uncertain glances. Sir Jimmy's grin faltered, then returned sharper than ever. Ah, then the listener speaks through you again. Very well. The lamb is spared, for now. The cage was wheeled back. The child's sobs echoed faintly in the chamber, a thin thread of humanity drowning in madness. Sir Jimmy turned his glare toward Ethan. But the messenger, he is ripe. Ethan's chest seized. The cultists hauled him to his feet, dragging him toward the platform above the pit. The heat rose in waves, the smell of blood suffocating. He stared down at the infected thrashing below, their eyeless faces raised toward him, their teeth gnashing. The chanting swelled. Marrow! 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 Kelson stepped close, his whisper hot in Ethan's ear. Do not fear. If you are chosen, you will not be devoured. You will be transformed. The platform tilted. Ethan's body pitched forward. And as he stared into the pit of snapping jaws, he swore he heard the bride's voice again, soft and sweet, cutting through the roar of madness. Ethan, join us. The world fell away. Ethan plunged into heat and darkness, the roar of chanting fading behind him, replaced by the guttural chorus of the infected below. His body smashed into the pit with a bone-jarring thud. Pain exploded through his ribs. He gasped, the stench of blood filling his lungs. And then, they were on him. Headless torsos and limbless bodies thrashed forward, teeth snapping, jaws clamping against his skin. Their bodies were raw, mangled, fused together by crude iron rods. They dragged themselves with twitching spines, pulling across the gore-soaked floor like grotesque serpents. Ethan screamed, shoving them off, but they kept coming. One sank its teeth into his arm. Agony ripped through him. He tore free, flesh dangling, blood pouring, but they swarmed again. Above him, the cult roared with laughter and delight. Marrow! Marrow! A jaw snapped inches from his throat. Ethan shoved it back, and froze. The infected's eyes locked with his. Not blind rage, but focus. They weren't mindless. They were studying him. Another clamped onto his leg, but instead of tearing flesh, it pressed its teeth against his skin, and whispered. Not words, not exactly. But a sound threaded with something human. A vibration that slid under his flesh, into his marrow. Joy. Ethan's heart stuttered. His vision blurred. The pit seemed to breathe, its walls of bone pulsing, the infected shifting in rhythm. It was as if the entire chamber had become one great lung inhaling him. A hand, if it could still be called that, latched onto his chest. Its nails dug deep, drawing blood. And then, like a flood, the voices poured into him. We are not gone. We are not rage. We are the marrow. We are the bones. We are waiting. He convulsed, blood flooding his mouth. He tried to push them off, but his body wasn't listening anymore. Something moved inside him, his bones humming, his marrow burning as if alive. Above, Sir Jimmy's voice rang out, gleeful. He dances. The marrow sings in him. The crowd roared. Ethan collapsed, twitching. The infected surrounded him, pressing against his body, their jaws gnashing not to tear but to commune. He felt their teeth against his skin, sharp and cold, but instead of pain there was a horrifying intimacy. They were not devouring him, they were pouring themselves into him. His vision swam with images. Cities of bone rising from oceans of blood. Skies blackened by screaming mouths. Humanity kneeling, not because of infection, but because it had chosen to worship. And at the center of it all, the bride of bones, veiled and radiant, holding out her clawed hand for him. Ethan, her voice coiled through his skull, seductive, tender, monstrous. Become. He thrashed violently, his scream tearing from his throat. The cult above howled, thinking it ecstasy. Then, hands gripped him, hauling him upward. The pit receded, jaws snapping below. Ethan was dragged back to the platform, blood dripping from his wounds, his body trembling. As if possessed. The crowd erupted, Sir Jimmy laughing until tears streaked his powdered cheeks. The temple has spared him. He is chosen. Ethan collapsed onto the bone-carved floor, gasping, eyes wide. His skin burned where the infected had touched him, patterns of bruises forming not at random but in spirals. The same symbols carved into the temple walls. Kelson knelt beside him, his face glowing with awe. You feel it, don't you? The marrow singing in your veins. They marked you, Ethan. They welcomed you. You are no longer simply a man, you are a bridge. Ethan's voice cracked. They whispered. Kelson's smile widened. Yes. They speak through marrow. And soon, through you, they will speak to all of us. Sir Jimmy strutted forward, jabbing his scepter into the floor beside Ethan's head. Then let him prove it. Let him call them. The cult fell silent, every face turned toward Ethan. Hundreds of painted eyes, hundreds of blonde wigs bobbing in expectation. Ethan's body shook uncontrollably. He tried to crawl, to escape, but his lips trembled, and before he could stop himself, a sound slid out, low, guttural, inhuman. The same sound as the listener. The cult gasped, then erupted in ecstasy. Sir Jimmy twirled his scepter, shrieking with joy. The messenger speaks with the marrow. Kelson closed his eyes, whispering like a prayer. It has begun. Ethan clutched his chest, tears streaming down his face, because the voice hadn't just come out of him. It was still inside him. And it was laughing. The night inside the Bone Temple had no stars. The high windows had been sealed with skulls, their hollow sockets staring down at the congregation. Torches sputtered against walls of bone, shadows writhing like living things. Ethan stood in the center, surrounded by the Jimmies. His clothes were soaked in his own blood. The spiraling bruises burned on his skin, pulsing like fresh wounds. Every breath he took dragged marrow-deep whispers through his chest, as though something else was breathing inside him. Kelson hovered nearby, eyes alight with feverish awe. Sir Jimmy paced in circles, his blonde wig crooked, his painted cheeks running with sweat. The crowd swayed, chanting Ethan's name, but not in his voice. In the marrow's voice. Heathen. Heathen. The sound scraped against his mind until he wanted to claw his ears out. Then, the temple began to move. The walls shifted, bone grinding on bone. Ribs bent inward like arms closing. A great shudder rippled through the floor. From the pit below, a moan rose, not rage, not hunger, but a choir of suffering. Hundreds of infected voices, weaving together into something almost holy. Kelson raised his arms. She comes. The bride of bones approaches. The cult howled, throwing themselves to the ground. Ethan staggered backward, staring as the pit cracked open. Something emerged. At first, it was only fabric, veils of flayed skin drifting upward like smoke. Then the shape beneath revealed itself, towering, skeletal yet impossibly full. Her bones were gilded with marrow that glowed like molten light. Her skull bore a crown of teeth. And her empty sockets fixed on Ethan. The bride of bones. She stepped from the pit as though walking on air, each movement rattling the entire temple. Her veils trailed across the floor, leaving streaks of crimson where bone dust became blood. Ethan fell to his knees. He didn't mean to. His body simply obeyed. Her voice filled the chamber. Not sound, but a vibration that cracked through every survivor's marrow. The living are meat. The infected are vessels. But you are bridge. Kelson sobbed openly, clutching his satchel of skulls. Take him, my bride. Sing through him. Let his marrow be your scripture. Sir Jimmy, wild with glee, shrieked, make him your prophet. Make him the golden tongue of bone. Ethan's head throbbed. The whispers in his blood screamed louder, demanding surrender. His chest ached as if his ribs wanted to split apart. The bride drifted closer, her skeletal hand reaching, claws extending like ivory needles. No, he rasped, tears streaking his face. I won't. But the voices in him laughed. You are already ours. The marrow is not a choice. The marrow is you. The bride touched his chest. Pain detonated through his body. His ribs cracked outward. His bones began to glow beneath his skin. His scream tore into something no longer human, a guttural wail that shook the temple. The cult fell silent. Even Sir Jimmy froze, awe flooding his painted face. Ethan rose, not of his own will, but lifted by invisible strings. His body stretched, bones snapping into new shapes. His veins blackened. His mouth opened wide, too wide, a second voice screaming with his own. Kelson whispered, trembling with ecstasy. He is the Marrow Prophet. Ethan's vision blurred. Through the agony, he saw flashes, the world beyond the temple, cities falling not to the infected but to worship. Survivors kneeling, painting their skin with bone dust. Children singing the Marrow's hymns. Humanity, not devoured, but converted. And he saw himself at the center of it, standing beside the bride, his voice carrying the infection not of rage, but of faith. The final horror. He tried to resist, but his marrow betrayed him. His hands rose, palms outward. Words poured from his mouth in a language older than language. The infected in the pit shrieked in unison. Not rage. Reverence. The Jimmies collapsed to their knees. Sir Jimmy clutched his chest, tears of joy soaking his wig. Yes. Speak, prophet. Lead us to the bone dawn. The bride's skull face lowered to Ethan's ear. Her voice was tender, almost loving. Now, sing them home. And Ethan did. The temple quaked as his voice roared out, carried by the marrow in every wall, every skull, every bone. The sound spread beyond the temple, into the ruins of cities, into the night sky itself. Every survivor who heard it dropped to their knees. Every infected froze, trembling, their rage dissolving into something far more terrible, obedience. The world had a new order. Ethan's tears streamed silently as the bride took his hand. The cult rose, their chanting becoming hymns. Humanity was no longer fighting the infected. Humanity was becoming them. The bone temple glowed with marrow light, and the final thought Ethan had before the voice erased his own was the cruelest of all. The dead hadn't won. The living had given themselves away.